Welcome to the show, Our Democracy, The CJR Show. In this show, we will discuss questions of democracy, governance, elections, and other topical issues in Guyana and occurrences in countries around the world. We hope the show will be of interest to everyone. So let's begin the show. Good day. Welcome to another in the series, Our Democracy, The CJR Show. Today is Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025, and after a long holiday weekend, we are back on the show. First of all, I would like to take the opportunity to express my deepest sorrow and sympathies to the Catholic community in Guyana for the passing of Pope Francis, head of the Catholic Church. Before we go further, I want to share with you a brief history of Guyana's relationship with the Holy See and the Vatican, both of which are in Rome. I once went to Dr. Jagan soon after he became President of Guyana and suggested to him that we explore the possibilities of establishing diplomatic relations with the Holy See and the Vatican in Rome. He agreed. I further suggested to the President that whenever a representative of the Vatican arrives in Guyana to pay a courtesy call on him, he should take the opportunity to have a chat with him and to broach the subject with him in terms of diplomatic relations. I further suggested to the President that whenever the Vatican representative arrives in the country, he can also raise with him the possibility of placing a courtesy call on the Pope. That was Pope John Paul. Eventually, the Apostolic Nuncio, representing the Holy See, based in Trinidad and Tobago, arrived in Guyana in 1996. He paid a courtesy call on President Jagan. I was present at that meeting in my capacity as Foreign Minister. Within the time available, the two men sat and discussed a range of issues, including problems associated with poverty, human rights, the foreign debt and debt relief, which at that time was a major international issue championed by leaders from the global south, but particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, by Fidel Castro. When President Jagan explained to the visitor the difficulties he was having as head of state with the international financial institutions in respect to his demands for debt relief, such as debt write-offs or the rescheduling of debts to help Guyana as one of the most heavily indebted countries, he was told by the visitor that the foreign debt was not an act of God, but an act of man, and therefore could be resolved by man. The Vatican representative nevertheless took note of President Jagan's interest in the matter and offered to transmit the issue to his principals in Rome. When President Jagan suggested the establishment of diplomatic relations between Guyana and the Holy See, his suggestion was warmly welcomed by the visitor. I, as the then Foreign Minister, was instructed to initiate the process. About 1 year after, on June 9, 1997, Guyana established diplomatic relations with the Holy See. I was happy to be part of that event. During the same meeting, President Jagan informed the visitor that he will be traveling to Rome in November of the same year to participate in the United Nations-sponsored World Food Summit. The suggestion was made that although Guyana and the Holy See did not have diplomatic relations by that time, it would be useful for the President to pay a courtesy call on the Pope and to do so while in Rome. It was agreed that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Guyana would collaborate with the Holy See's diplomatic mission or the Apostolic Nunciature based in Trinidad, which is the equivalent of a full-fledged diplomatic mission, to realize that agreement. During the World Food Summit, I was advised that a date and time was set for the courtesy call on Pope John Paul to take place at the Vatican. On the appointed day and time, President Jagan, me, and Fazal Ali, who was then the president or the general secretary, of the Rice Producers Association, visited the Pope, who warmly welcomed us. The Pope and the President discussed the outcome of the summit and its likely impact on governments and NGOs, that is the World Food Summit. Challenges arising from global poverty, hunger, and human suffering were also discussed. President Jagan raised his concerns with respect to the foreign debt and his appeals for debt relief. He alerted the Pope about his call for a new global human order. The Pope indicated his support. For his part, the Pope informed the President that earlier he had made a call for debt relief, describing it as, quote, an investment not only in the development of poor countries, but also in the security of rich nations, end of quote. He added that, quote, debt relief must be heeded on moral and ethical grounds, end of quote. I was happy to see that his successor, Pope Francis, continued in a similar philosophical and ideological direction throughout his years at the Vatican, so much so that he became known as the People's Pope because he reached out to the poor and dispossessed, the marginalized and the oppressed. Pope Francis was once quoted as saying, and I quote, what is built on the basis of force and not on the truth about the equality and dignity of every human being begins badly and will end badly, end of quote. As the spiritual leader of an estimate 1.3 billion Catholics around the world, including Guyana, Francis pushed back against world leaders who demonize migrants, the poor, and the marginalized for political gain. He repeatedly warned of a return of authoritarianism and nationalism's tendency to reintroduce history's horrors in reference to the era of fascism. He looked out for and spoke up for the world's long-suffering people, as well as the meek. He was the voice of those who did not have a voice. Pope Francis cared for migrants, safeguarded the health of the planet, and protected human rights. He was the Pope of the poor, of the migrants, and of the incarcerated, that is, those who were imprisoned. Millions around the world mourn Pope Francis's death, believing that with his passing, a huge void has been created. Let's hope that his successor will continue to uphold and spread his legacy. Now let's dive into the other issue for today. In response to the 2025 International Narcotics Control Strategy Report, the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs of Guyana, the Honorable Mr. Anil Nandalal, Senior Counsel, issued a press statement on April 22, 2025. In a statement, the minister said, and I quote, I wish to express some level of surprise and disappointment in respect of much of the materials published in the report regarding Guyana's anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism framework and capabilities. He went on to recall how a questionnaire was circulated from the publishers of the report, and he responded that, however, quote, large volumes of critical information were supplied, but were unfortunately omitted in the report, end of quote. Mr. Nandalal went on to point out that, quote, there is no need for one to speculate in relation to Guyana's AML, CFT credentials. That what is needed, that these documents or credentials were recently scrupulously examined over a period of 18 months from September 2022 to June 2024 in a mutual evaluation exercise conducted by the most premier regulatory body in the hemisphere, known as the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. The Attorney General emphasized that in that process, quote, every aspect of Guyana's AML CFT framework was critically scrutinized, including our legislative framework, our administrative processes, our investigative capabilities, and our law enforcement and prosecutorial capacities. And as though that was not enough to stress the legitimacy of Guyana AML CFT credentials, the AG said, quote, additionally, various critical sectors were interrogated, including the mining, banking, and real estate sectors, revenue collection, gaming authority, and the commercial and deed registries, end of quote. I quote a lot from the minister's letter or public statement because it is extremely important for listeners to understand that the government of Guyana, through its Attorney General, has responded fully and comprehensively to this report. In fact, continuing, the minister writing about the report said, quote, even Guyana's interagency as well as its inter-country cooperation mechanisms were examined. In the end, Guyana was given a clean bill of health. In fact, Guyana fared better than most of its Caribbean counterparts, end of quote. And as regards linking money laundering to corruption and organized crime, the Attorney General stated, quote, any statement linking money laundering to corruption amongst public officials must be substantiated by empirical/anecdotal evidence. Whilst, of course, there are cases of corruption and money laundering. In these instances, government has acted with alacrity to take the proportionate and appropriate actions against the individuals. To attempt to link money laundering to holders of public office and corruption without citing or adumbrating the overwhelming cases which have led to this conclusion is more speculative and sensational reportage, end of quote. Nandalal emphasized, quote, Guyana has demonstrated that it will not tolerate corruption, especially related to public officials. He pointed out that, quote, Guyana has won what is called the Best Case Award in the Caribbean region for its efforts in fighting money laundering and anti-corruption. In treating with the question of sanctioned persons, companies in Guyana, the AG made it pellucidly clear that, quote, it is a fact of public notoriety that upon the publication of that announcement, the government of Guyana made a public statement that it will engage the United States law enforcement agencies in rendering mutual legal assistance on those matters, End of quote. In response to questions to the effect that, quote, there have been few money laundering convictions in Guyana. This is one of the questions that was raised in the report. Why is this so? What systems are being implemented to see the numbers increasing? What was Mr. Nandalal's response? This is what he said. He said, it is common ground that government has absolutely no control. That's my word, absolute. That government has no control over the determination of cases by the judiciary. We adhere strictly to judicial independence and the doctrine of separation of powers. End of quote. The Attorney General went on to add, quote, since we came into office in 2020, speaking about the current AFNALI administration, the volume of investigation and charges have greatly increased. There are currently 298 money laundering charges, with one conviction obtained in money laundering, whilst in other instances, persons have been convicted of other offenses, such as obtaining by false pretense. He went on to point out that SOCU, which is Serious Organized Crime Unit, engages with regional organizations such as the RSS, the Regional Security System, as does the Financial Institution Union with its regional and international FIU counterparts. He added that we anticipate that properly conducted trials, convictions will be borne out for persons charged. The Attorney General went on to speak now, address certain issues that were raised in the report concerning law enforcement. And this is what he had to say. Quote, law enforcement has been using tools related to combating money laundering, such as freezing, restraint, and asset forfeiture, to ensure that the assets are not disposed or dissipated by charged or accused persons upon conviction. These assets can be made available to the state to further improve the crime-fighting capabilities of the country. He went on to add, in addition to monies, this includes instrumentalities such as boats and planes, precious metals, precious stones, can be used by the relevant supervisory authorities for export to bring monies into the economy, as opposed to being abused and clandestinely taken away from the citizens of Guyana by criminal persons. Mr. Nandalal, as we can see from what was said just before what we say, dealt comprehensively with this report. He clarified that, quote, the Customs Anti-Narcotics Unit, namely CANU, has been involved in making some of the larger drug busts between 2024 and 2025. And further, there has been increased training for staff and persons in law enforcement and the office of the DPP, which are yielding greater results. Clearly, this is a very comprehensive, detailed, and factual response by the Attorney General and Minister of Justice of Guyana to the report. This brings me to the end of today's show, during which we dealt extensively with two topics: the death of Pope Francis, a brief history of Guyana's relationship with the Holy See, and the legacy of the late Pope. Secondly, we dealt at length with the government of Guyana's response to the International Narcotics Control Strategy 2025 report. I look forward to meeting with you once again on Saturday, April 26, 2025 at 5 p.m. Please do not forget to share your views about the show with me. Goodbye.